This episode is brought to you by our awesome friends of the podcast, Drillbit Labs, run by co-founders Lawson Pybus and Thomas Stokes. Drillbit Labs is a leading UX research and digital strategy consulting firm. They work side by side with UX and product design leaders to elevate their digital strategy, delight their users, and outperform business goals. If you're interested in partnering with them, reach out to them via their website, drillbitlabs.com, or ping them at info@drillbitlabs.com. Okay, so I'd like to welcome all of our listeners to another episode of the UX Online podcast. And just before we do start this interview, I just want to remind all of our listeners that if you aren't already following us or subscribed, then do that if you can on the podcast platform that you're listening to this podcast on. And if you can give us a rating, I hope 5-star rating. I hope you're enjoying this show. If not, be honest, and that's all that matters. So thank you. And now we're moving to today's episode, which is with the amazing Darren Hood, someone I've been wanting and hoping and praying to get on this show for a long time. I've managed to get him on. So thank you for coming on. So Darren Hood is a professor, teaches at many different universities in the States. As we spoke before, my geography isn't the best, so I've probably forgotten which universities. In the States, where he's a professor, a certified UX manager and specialist, and also a podcaster. So got fingers in many different pies, but I'm sure we'll find out why. So nice to have you on the show, Darren.
Thanks for having me on the show, Dale. Yeah, excited.
No problem. So maybe just to start it off in the proper way, would you like to give maybe just an introduction? Obviously, I reeled off the different things that you do, but maybe it'd be good for our listeners just to understand in more detail what you are doing and maybe how you ended up, maybe not the long story, because we'll get into that later, but just kind of how you ended up where you are now.
Right. Yes. Okay. So my name is Darren Hood. I am a 28 plus year veteran of experience design, user-centered design, whatever people want to call it. Just don't call me UX UI, whatever you do. Sure said UX, not UI. Just don't call me that.
That's far from this podcast, so don't worry.
I teach I'll name the schools off for you. I teach at Michigan State University in the Masters of CX program there. I teach for UCLA Extension for their UX certificate program. I teach at Brandeis University on the East Coast of the United States in their master's program for user-centered design. And I also teach at Lawrence Technological University, which ironically is located in Southfield, Michigan, where I reside, just outside of Detroit.
There we go. Very nice. That's cool. So it worked out well for you, that one.
Yep.
Awesome. And so you mentioned before, so I'll tell everyone my age. I'm 31, just to give you an idea of how long you've been in the industry, almost as long as I've been alive, which is crazy if you think about it. So I'd like to kind of go into a bit more detail into like how that happened. Like obviously this is a long time ago. I was learning to walk when you entered this world of gives a perspective on just how long you've been in the field, which I find incredible as well, that you're still at it despite what we find that today, what has happened to the field, which I'm sure we'll also get into as well. But how did that come about? So I imagine it was early on in your career. It's probably something you did from the off, I imagine. How did that come about?
It's going to be fun. And I purposely didn't say this during my little portion of the interview. I knew it would come out.
No problem. I set myself up, don't worry.
I actually started out my professional career, and I'm going to date myself, but I started off my professional career as a word processor.
Wow,
now, people think, what in the word? Now, people know word processing when they think about Microsoft Word. Well, there used to be machines that were dedicated to word processing. There was no Microsoft Word.
So this is even before that.
There was no Word, but Wow. So I started out my career. My first full-time job was actually as a delivery person. But then after that, it was as a word processor. So this was my advent into technology. Working with this kind of stuff, and I was always at the top of that field, an expert in certain systems. I had my full-time job, and then I went to companies at night because everybody sort of knew who it was, and I would make a lot of money doing that kind of stuff. Much for that day and time, but Fast forward, I ended up being a salesperson. I ended up being a customer service person.
Mm.
And then that's when the change happened.
Okay.
Working as a customer service person,
Hmm.
processing benefits, the
Okay.
advent of the internet comes along and everybody's
Mm.
rushing to get on the
Mm.
internet.
Yeah.
And as everybody's rushing to get on the internet, I was always the guy that people would call when something technological
Yeah.
would come up. And
Hmm.
and so I was doing some work with a nonprofit and they wanted to go get on the internet like everybody else. The
Mm.
days of sureware,
Yeah.
global sureware at the time. But I said, you know what? I can help. I can let me figure things out and I'll
Mm.
take it for you. And I started doing things that I know what the technical terms are now. I
Mm.
started looking at information architecture. I started trying to make sure that things were
Mm.
intuitive. I started trying to make sure we had the right labels and the right nomenclature, the
Mm.
right taxonomies.
Yeah.
I start looking at all these things. I started looking at cognitive load. Of course, I didn't call it cognitive load.
No.
I start looking at contrast. Want to make sure the contrast, and not knowing that I was doing accessibility related things.
Sure.
I entered the field and I just immediately fell in love with it. And like a lot of
Wow.
people who got into UX, I mean, people are choosing
Yeah.
into UX now,
Mm.
but then it was more of a discovering by accident.
Yeah.
Almost everyone we talked to discovered it by accident. And so that
Sure.
was that was my venture into the field.
Wow.
And then I became an instructional designer full time.
Hmm.
Okay. I was doing training before that, but I started doing that full time and then doing what we now call UX part time in the evenings, which
Mm.
turned into doing it part time during my day job. And I'm like, you know what? I just love this. And
Yeah.
2005, I started doing UX work on a full time basis.
Okay. So 2005. Okay.
Yep.
So this was this I'm trying to think of the word. Maybe I edit this part out. Where do I want to go with this? Okay, yeah. So was this due to just your passion for obviously what you were learning, or was it more
Yes.
about okay, it's a very new industry. It's also a good time to enter it as well because it is like emerging. So
I had no idea. I had no idea. I was just following my passion.
okay, you're just
I mean,
following your passion.
yeah. When I did that work for that nonprofit, I started doing that work part time in the evening. So I started a
Okay,
freelancer in the evenings,
okay.
and so it was this steady passion,
Mm,
and I just learned, and I kept learning more. I started buying
yeah,
more books. I started building. I do a lot of book recommendations, and as I'm sure you know
yeah,
about. That's when that
absolutely.
stuff started. That's
Yeah.
when okay, the book says a lot. Okay, because we didn't
Mm,
have
no.
degree programs.
Mm-mm.
You didn't have. I mean, they were starting, but they were usually master's programs, and I
Okay.
didn't. I mean, I got an associate's in 1991, and I didn't get my degree until 2006. That was
Okay.
when I finished my master's degree. So I wasn't thinking about a master's degree. I was
No.
doing good stuff. So for me, it
Yeah.
was all books. It was all
Mm,
conferences. It was
yeah.
all online websites that you could sit and just
Sure.
study hours. So I
Yeah.
was self-taught.
Exactly. I was about to say that because that's kind of the route I took. So your kind of background in a more elongated version is similar to mine in a more condensed version. Like I have a tech hardware background. I started out repairing computers, PCs. I was the guy that people came to for this sort of thing. Then I ended up in customer service. So at Microsoft, a Microsoft project.
Mhm.
I always performed really well in, especially with the handling of clients and business clients and things like that. And I
Uh,
enjoyed more that side of building that rapport with the customers and also understanding their experience and understanding just talking to them. And that way you would find out a lot more than just like, okay, you want to cancel, okay, punch a few buttons and then let them on their way, which is what customer service more or less was. You were given a script and you just had to follow. I like to kind of go off that and try and understand a bit more. And from that, yeah, I discovered, but obviously I discovered a more established UX field, whereas you kind of had to, I don't know, understand it for yourself. So no,
yeah.
it's really, really interesting. And what was it specifically about it that you loved? Was it a specific, I don't know, was it the human side of it, or was it just more the technical
I think it,
understanding all these different? Yeah, go.
I think it's just the journey. I
Okay.
enjoyed the journey. I enjoyed solving problems.
Hmm.
I enjoyed the discovery that would arise from research.
Hmm.
I enjoyed, of course, at that time because there were so few companies that were not really involved. I was
Yeah,
involved with helping companies establish an online brand a
sure.
lot of times, and I did all the things. I know a lot of people think, "Oh, I wonder if Darren's a specialist." Specialists didn't come until 2011, 2012. So
Yeah,
for people who were doing the work early on, we did everything.
yeah.
You did the information architecture, you did the UX research, you did all these
Mm.
things. I even went further than that because I worked for a company where we started and we were servicing credit unions
Hmm.
across the country, and we established, it was my idea, went to them,
Mm.
pitched it, it was approved. We started a web design division inside of our company, so we were doing
Wow.
all of this work for, when we called it a web design company, but we were doing more than that because we were
Mm.
doing, I was designing logos, was creating all the graphics that were used. So I
Mm.
was doing a lot of that graphic stuff that a lot of people transition in today, and they don't transition in well, I will say, because
Yeah.
that world is very ego driven. It's not very
Mm.
user centered.
Yeah.
It's more what you want to do or about what wows or excites people as opposed to what's intuitive and what
Yes.
meets the needs, really hitting that sweet spot between user needs,
Yeah.
business constraints. Those people don't do that kind of stuff. I was
Yeah.
doing all of it, but I always maintain a user-centered
Mm.
perspective. But I
Sure.
understood the importance because I had a sales background, so I understood what that part of the business was like, and so that
Mm.
always was a part of who I was.
Ah, that's really interesting. So, yeah, because back then, like you said, there was no specialization. Like now, you can also, I want to do only research. I want to do only.
Yeah.
You had to do everything and kind of, and also back then, I don't know if it's what you're referring to in that specific role that you were doing there. I suppose all the research, the design, you're kind of learning it as you went along. Obviously, you're reading resources, different things. Were there back then like structured frameworks and structured just ways and processes to do things? You're laughing, so I guess that's
No. And you'll also hear a lot of people who got into UX early. We learned a lot of things
yeah,
as we went along. And I'll throw an asterisk on it because we were learning things as we went. However, truth be told, a lot of what we do is very commonsensical.
yeah, sure,
That's why when I did that first project, it
mm,
was just common sense to make sure things were easy to use.
yeah,
It was common sense to make sure that contrast was good or people weren't going
of
to be able to
course, yeah,
read. So I'm firmly of the belief that a lot of what we do in UX is very commonsensical, and then we
mm,
just, now we have frameworks around things. Now we have a lot of
yeah,
structure, and, but it really is all, it's all birthed out of common sense. I mean,
of
necessity
course, yeah, yeah,
of invention. People say that's really what it is. If we
yeah,
pay attention to that, and
of
if we
course, yeah,
the shirt tails of emotional intelligence, which I also felt was a part of that, yeah,
yeah,
you can't help but be successful at
yeah,
started and
and I
grounding.
think. Yeah, yeah, that's true, and I think as well now because there is such an abundance of all of these like buzzwords and frameworks and design thinking and things like this, which yeah, I like to try and avoid. That sometimes you have all of these different things that it even hinders you because you're looking to try and fit into a framework and you don't use common sense anymore. You completely ignore your own thinking in your own way to look at things and kind of step outside of that and think, wait a minute, let's just look at this just as a human. Like this framework just isn't going to work. It's going to actually add more work. We're going to miss things. We're not
Yep.
going to really be focusing on what we're supposed to be focusing on. So, no, I think probably it's better to enter when you enter than now, because now, if you do want to enter the field, you're just inundated with
Yes.
information, and trying to
Yeah.
sift through that is tricky, which I
Yeah.
found.
Not only information, but a ton of misinformation.
Yeah,
Because
exactly. That's yeah,
prior to 2011, there was practically, I always mention this, and anybody who listens to my show has heard me say this 1,000 times.
yeah,
There was there was practically zero misinformation in UX prior to
mm,
2011.
yeah,
Practically zero. You could
mm,
go to any conference and come out a better person. You could pick up any book and come out with a sharper saw. And then all of a sudden, when I always say that UX started becoming under siege in 2011. That's when a lot of
okay,
things shifted, and not to our good, really to our
mm,
detriment. And that's when misinformation started. That's when
Yeah.
people started lying to get UX jobs, which
Yeah.
started becoming very common between 2011 to 2015.
Mm.
They do what I call fabricating relevance. Uh, People who do things to try to seem like they bring something to the table. A lot of thought leaders today, they're not
Yeah.
thought leaders. They're somebody just trying to fabricate relevance, bring
Yeah.
themselves to a field where that they have an interest, but they
Mm.
don't have a commitment.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
when people don't love the discipline, because we're still a baby. When
Yeah.
we're doing UX work, we go to a meeting, and there's 8, 9, 10 disciplines represented in that meeting. We're always the baby. We're always the one
Mm.
that folks don't understand. We're
Yeah.
the only one that people want to democratize. We're the
Yeah.
only one other people try to do our jobs. Nobody's trying to do the developer's job. Nobody's trying to do the QA. We're the only ones, and so
Mm.
we're still in need of caregiving.
Yeah.
We're still in need of ambassadorship,
Yeah.
representation, and so you've got people coming in trying to make themselves relevant without understanding any of those things, and
Yeah.
so a lot of negligence.
Mm.
There's a lot of things that don't get done, a lot of oversight or things
Yeah.
being overlooked, and that's why the UX UI thing it becomes. People didn't even used to say that.
Yeah.
That nobody said UX UI in 2008.
Mm.
And I like how Elizabeth Rosenweg says that that's a conflation because the people don't even know what the slash means.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
we slash UX slash UI, they don't even realize what that implies. So
Mm.
people don't understand who we are to begin with, and
Yeah.
then you UX slash UI. Well, congratulations for throwing more oil on that fire of
Yeah.
misinformation because now misinformation leads to a disconnect in value perception
Yeah.
amongst other things. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's tough for people coming in because they get introduced with things that are not. You mentioned design
Yeah.
thinking. Design thinking, according to the history, design thinking was not even intended to be what people think it is today, and it was something that was created by that original company as something they could generate as a billable factor. That's all.
Yeah.
They were just
Yeah.
trying to they took things that already existed, they removed the user from the equation.
Yeah. That was.
You can't remove the user, still have user experience. They removed the user from the equation. They did something that other people could participate in so that they could have more ownership and have more ego. So they're interjecting ego into something that
Mm.
is an ego-free
Yeah.
discipline. And so long story short, it just created more misinformation. Now people think that's the way to go when
Yeah.
actually they moved critical elements that generated proper
Yeah.
user experiences and left it in the hand of design thinkers and a whole people who are infected with hubris and Dunning-Kruger, I like to call it. And those are problems. Those are things
Yeah.
we come to push away to achieve
Mm.
our goals, and now they've invited them in. So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, like, going back to the UX UI thing, like someone entering the field, like I did 4 or 5 years ago, you're hit with that. So then you think, okay, so this is what the field is. And then you start reading stuff because when you see that, you think, oh, that's the first thing I saw.
yep.
That's what I saw these thought leaders putting out. So that must
Anchoring
be what.
bias.
Exactly, exactly. So, and then you start along that path, but then you go so far into that then it's not too late, but you're so far into that when anyone does say, look, that's not really right, or then your back's automatically up. You say, oh, this person wants to change, wants to. Yeah. So yeah, it just sets people up for failure if they don't kind of take a
Yep.
step back as soon as possible. And also just like grammatically, the slash would be for this or that, and UI without UX, or UX, like obviously UX is its own discipline. To have UI, you need the UX before, but they're not interchangeable. And I think this is the confusion that someone who maybe has a graphic design background can just make it work and change it on their CV that, oh yeah, I do UX, I spoke to a user. it's kind of not what it is. So yeah, because I've seen that as well. Like, well, we speak to users in a few like job interviews I've done. There are
Mhm.
UX UI job postings, and I've been in the interview, and it's like, well, yeah, we speak to users, but then when you actually interview them in the interview and say, well, what are your processes for that, or how do you use those insights, what you're getting, and they have no idea. It's like, well, we just we
Right.
like what they say, and then we go straight to Figma and try and like guess on what it is. Yeah, it's
Uh,
so from your point of view, how can someone, if they are entering the field now, because I do have a lot of listeners who are
mhm.
studying UX or do love the discipline and they want to start off on the right foot, how does someone enter this field and avoid the misinformation? Because it can be hard. Because if your feed on LinkedIn is just full, and also just to know like if this is what I'm reading, is this valid? Is this valid? Or how do you do that?
Wow. Oh man, you just mentioned some fantastic things there. It's almost when I think about, okay, how does a person get started? And I'm going to be extremely rudimentary in my response to that because you get started before you get started. And what I mean by that is there's something that I've produced. I think you've probably seen it. It's called the UX cycle of excellence. And
Yes.
it really is I call it a framework. I called it a framework one day, and somebody was so grounded in the word framework that they never heard what I said, and I had to like disconnect from that person.
Understood.
You learn to listen skills. The the first thing that a person has to do, and I advise a person to, because this doesn't take a lot to do what I'm about to
Mm,
mention. These first
yeah.
two things, the UX cycle of excellence is a 7-step process, but it's the first two steps that I'm going to mention. This
Okay.
is how you get started. Get started. Number
Hmm.
one, you need to properly define.
Okay.
And from a person entering, that would be properly understand. Try to understand what UX is. Get a base.
Mm,
Understand what it is, because you also need to start developing a filter. If you don't develop a filter, you'll be exactly as the story you just presented a few
yeah.
moments ago. You'll be 5 years in, and it's easier to learn something correct from the beginning than
Mm,
to uproot something 5 years later. Because you become so, if you don't,
yeah.
you become grounded in anchoring bias, and you will
Mm,
have made so many mistakes. You will have entered the discipline and done so much damage to the
mm,
discipline, and now you become a problem.
yeah.
You want to be an asset. So in order to be an asset, you need to learn what UX is. I'm going to define it for you. I'm going to help you now, and you can decide whether or not you're going to accept it.
Mm,
UX is a moniker. Number one, UX is not a thing.
yeah.
It's not, I'm going to go and UX this thing. Oh, really? How much experience do you have? How do you think how are you going to plan on doing that? UX is a moniker. In other words, it's a term that's used to describe a broader entity.
Yeah.
UX is actually, I have an illustration. I think you've seen this as well. I call it the landscape of UX. It's an illustration with UX in the
Hmm.
middle, and it has the four pillars
Yes.
and then all these other elements. Somebody actually counted that. I never counted them. Somebody counted it. They said there's 250 items in this illustration.
Oh wow.
250. So when you say UX, and I say UX as a moniker,
Mm.
it's something that's used to describe these 250 things. Now, as you get started in your career, you're going to begin learning what these 250 things are. You're
Yeah.
going to begin putting them in your toolbox. But you need
Yes.
to understand first and foremost what UX is. It's a moniker. When I say UX, it's a moniker. So think UX/UI, 250/1. Does that make sense? No, it does
Mm.
not. So it's a moniker. Number two,
Yeah.
and not number two, and this is number two that's part of number one. It's a moniker. Now, UX is what doing UX work involves trying to decide and determine which of those 250 things or whatever your number is. Maybe you only know 25 or 30 to start. That's
Mm.
fine.
Yeah.
But which of these things can I use? Which of these methods, methodologies, techniques, and deliverables can I use to arrive at the sweet spot
Mm.
between business needs, user needs, and constraints?
Yeah.
That's what UX is. It's research, it's design, it's strategy,
Mm.
all rolled up into one,
Yeah.
and then putting these things to work to achieve
Mm.
the goal. for your business and for your users, because you also are the advocate for the people who use your product or solution. So that's it.
Yeah.
So what is you define it.
Yeah.
So that define it. Now, and there's a little bit of overlap. The second step is that you need to learn the fundamentals, something that a lot of people coming into UX don't learn.
Yes.
So what are the fundamentals? Back to that illustration. Feel free, anybody listening to this, feel free if you never, just go to images.google.com and search for Darren Hood landscape of UX. You'll find it. It's going to come up.
I can link it in when I post this podcast.
Excellent. You learn the fundamentals, and the 4 pillars of UX are heuristics and usability, information architecture, UX research, and interaction and interface design. So it would be interaction and GUI. We used to call it GUI. These folks call it UI. It always used to be called graphical user interface. They shortened it. They took off the graphical. They took off the G, and they call it UI. But technically, it's GUI. It's GUI. So, but you can't do a GUI if you don't know interaction design principles. So I grouped the two together into it, because a lot of people doing GUI interface, they don't know Bruce Tognazini's interaction design principles. They don't know Ben Schneiderman's interaction design principles. So they just decide something. They do. You mentioned guessing. They guess. Yeah. Experts don't guess.
Yes.
Experts determine. So, and if you are in UX, you're supposed to be an expert, or working your way toward being an expert
with experts.
So this is how you get started. Now the question is, will you go to please don't do a boot camp. I don't boot camps because they're very unethical and they're very predatory. But there are different ways you can go the self-taught route. There's enough good books to achieve that. Some companies, they don't want you if you don't have a degree. If you're forced to get a degree, or you're inclined to do a degree, it works for you to do a degree, then you're going to have to look at what that degree, what they're promoting as part of that program, because some degree programs are not ethical either.
Yeah. No, that's true.
And it's about making money. It's not about, they don't have a commitment to the discipline. So it's hard to find a degree that's dedicated to the discipline. So, and that'd be my foundation for getting started.
Okay. No, thank you for sharing that and making it clear as well. And like I said before, I'll link in that the image, or even just a link to the post that you've made about the 4 pillars. So if anyone is listening and they want to get a good grounding in what UX is, then they can do that. Because obviously it's a choice as well. Not everyone wants to. So I always like to put that out as well. Also, just on the university degree topic, just off the top of your head, do you know any good courses or things that people can do that you know of? Just also maybe because I can link those in as well, rather than someone going, and because maybe as a novice or an amateur, you're looking, you maybe don't really know what you're looking for. Like, I don't know if this is a good course.
Exactly. Because it's like people shop for educational resources, and they approach it as if they're grocery shopping. When you go grocery shopping, you know what you're looking for, you know the products. When you're looking for a UX program, you do not know.
No, exactly.
So you're going to be, that's why so many people go to boot camps. That's why people go through, I hope Google is not a sponsor of yours, because I'm going to shoot down their program, because people go through it, and that's not a proper, it's not even properly structured as an educational solution, because feedback is given by peers, not by experts.
Exactly.
So that's off the table.
And you can be easily enticed as well by the fancy words, the buzzwords, the cool certificate, and that's not what it's about.
Not good at all. I'll give a quick and easy answer on this one. If people go to my blog at uxuncensored.medium.com, there's a post where I give recommendations.
Okay, cool.
For educational solution places you can go. It's more bent toward the States, but there are some other programs that people can enroll in if they're not inside the United States. There are some certificate programs that are viable. They are through accredited organizations. That's something that a lot of people miss out on. When uncredited organizations offer you an education, there's a lot of things, they don't have the accountability to really be doing that. They don't realize that education is an institution, and there's a lot of people who try to educate with no respect for institutionalization, which is a poor value prop for the people that are going to be programs. You don't want to do that.
No, absolutely. Cool. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll link also. There'll be a lot of links on this, but useful links for our listeners, because I want to make sure that, because like I said before, I know many of our listeners are new or juniors. So if we can give them the right resources, then that's that's what this podcast is here for, and also what you're here for as well. So no,
Yep.
thank you for that. So now as we come towards the end of the recording, I just wanted to make it, again, advice for our listeners, but just if you were to, maybe this is some advice you received in the past when you were junior or when you were new or whatever. What is, if you were to kind of, encompass a good piece of advice that you would want to leave with our listeners, a junior or an intern or someone, what would you like to leave with them?
The thing that stands out in my mind is I would encourage people, if you're going to be in UX, one thing you need to understand is that you never arrive.
Yeah.
So
Good.
for that reason, if you're going to be in UX, you have to be committed to lifelong
Yes.
learning.
Yeah.
You will always be learning. You will always be unlearning. Because
Awesome.
this information is such a standard part of UX today, there are things that you'll be exposed to that eventually you're going to have to renounce.
Yeah,
You're going to have to,
exactly.
you know what? That actually wasn't a
Yeah.
good. I used to think that just learning a tool was going to do it, and I found out I actually need to be more committed to the fundamentals. Tools come and go. They already have come
Yeah.
and go. Everybody's on
Yes.
the Figma bandwagon today. Figma could
No, it's
disappear
true.
for 4 years.
Yeah,
And then
no. Yeah. It's true. It's true. Like when I started out, it was obviously there's Azure, there's a few others, but I started using Adobe XD, and already, like, this is only 4 or 5 years ago, and already that's died a death. So yeah, don't get
Yeah.
stuck to a tool. No, but that's some really nice learning. In my head, like, I envision it as a snakes and ladders, this unlearning and learning. That's like you're learning, you're on your path, you learn a lot of good stuff, and then you're going to come across something that you need to unlearn. And it's kind of, it's not that you're going back in your journey, but you need to take a step back and kind of relearn that aspect of what you've realized was misinformation or something that you maybe just need to realign again. So yeah, you need to just stay on the board. You'll never reach 100, but just got to keep going.
Never get there. There's always something else to learn.
Yeah, no, excellent. Thank you, Darren. I appreciate your time in sharing your journey, which was super, super interesting, and also sharing all of these cool resources and also your mindset towards UX, which I think needs to be also treasured in the industry at the moment, because there is so much, like you said, so much misinformation that we need to make sure we speak to the right people, and you're one of those. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem.